The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to what is episode 8 of Office Hours with Professor Pat. I am Pat. So I'm the leader of our capture practice, one of the co-founders of Zia Consulting, and we're here to talk about capture. And so we're trying to create a community to discuss some of the technologies that we work in, specifically within Ephesoft and Wrapup for capture. We're planning on creating more of these around other technologies that we do, as well as some of the services that we perform, like digital transformation. So those are coming up soon. How we do this, it's rather informal. And so if you have any questions and in real time, please feel free to ask questions. I have no problem and actually like deviating from my regularly scheduled program. And so we get questions out throughout the week, also other things that come up with clients, and that comes out with the content that we come up with for the particular week. So what are we going to talk about today? I wanted to first start off with an update with Semantik. If you're not familiar with Semantik, this is a cloud offering from Ephesoft that gives you the capability of being able to do invoice processing in a very AI ML way. They just kind of like opened it up, so there's some fast traction on what they're delivering. There's a episode, I think it's episode 6, 5 or 6, that we actually did a demo of Semantik. So if you're interested in that and not aware of that, please feel free to go watch that. And there's been a couple changes in the last couple weeks that I thought was notable, as well as the roadmap that they're working on. One of them is they finally introduced webhooks. So initially, there was not really a great way for the processing of these. So you email things in or forward them in via email into an address that you have for your enterprise, and then those can be reviewed. Those invoices can be reviewed and then downloaded with some metadata on those documents. Now they have the introduction of webhooks, and so you can configure a webhook for your instance of Semantik, and that gives you the capability with UiPath or other tools that support webhooks. There's certain BPM products that produce that support webhooks, and then be able to get those results. What is coming soon, and soon is sometime this summer, is line item extraction. Should be coming out, the first iteration of that soon. The first iteration of that is going to look very much like a manual automation. And what I mean by manual automation is the capability of being able to look at that invoice and say, this column, this column, and this column, and then it just will suck in all the rows for that particular invoice. They're going to then very fast traction work on automated extraction. I expect that out more late summer. And so there's a lot of tabular stuff going to be coming out of that invoice extraction. And then they're going to be introducing confidence thresholds. Confidence thresholds give the capability. Right now, everything needs to be reviewed. And so all invoices are going to go in, and they're going to give you the confidences for each field that they extract, but they want people to look at those. And they're going to start giving you the capability of configuring out thresholds, so you can just have total throughput. And so you can say, if that confidence is 90, just push it through and then you hit the webhook. I also spoke with Chris Thompson, who is responsible for this product, yesterday, and he also said that he is working on mechanism for APIs to be able to import as well. So including email, being able to push things through to Semantik for being able to process, which will make that import intake capability of Semantik a lot easier. All right, enough of that. So let's start talking about Ephesoft Transact. One of the things that I started looking at over the course of the last week is all the options that you can have when you're looking at a document level field. And so if you're not familiar with Ephesoft, essentially you can create a document. That document can have classification capabilities as well as assembly. So figuring out how to reassemble that document if given in a PDF where there's a bunch of documents inside of there. And then you can create fields, and those fields can have extraction capabilities. We looked, I think, in week 1 or 2 about all the different extraction mechanisms that you have, but we didn't really look at what that document level field can do. To be honest, I was surprised at a couple of them that I've never really used and might be useful. Some of them are just kind of legacy and not really used that often, and so let's go ahead and touch on those. I'm going to kind of pop back and forth between Ephesoft and the presentation, just to kind of give a little bit of context inside of here. So what I did was I created a simple batch class, and right now I can't find my mouse. There it is. And I created a simple document type. In this case, I just used 1003, which is used for an application for mortgage. And then I just have a few fields. And what I'm going to be talking about today are these fields right here. A lot of people will just create a name, which has certain naming conventions that you want to use space and things of that nature. A description of that, you can pick on whether you're using the name or the description inside of the user interface. And then they use a data type. A lot of times people do not manipulate this, and we'll go through that as well. So let's talk about those first three first. So name, description, and data type, because they're fairly simple. So name, it's just a unique key. So that's something that you can't really name, but you can export that document. You can import that document into another batch class. You can copy that document type, but the name is going to be unique for that particular batch class. Then there's going to be a description, which can be used as the user interface. There are certain reasons why I would not use like a space in the name. Going back, you have some of the capability of doing fixed form extraction, and fixed form extraction, you don't really have the mechanism if you're using the Windows platform of putting a space on that key. You would use RicoStar to create that IDE. You would create fixed form for things like OMR, for checkbox extraction. You might use it for signature detection, things of that nature, perhaps handwriting, but there are other options for that as well. And so I would never use a space within a name, but I might use it in the description. By default, the description is going to be used inside of the user interface when you look at the validation screen. And the data type is mostly used for scripting and export. What I mean by that is for scripting capabilities, you can use something like anything that's a date, I want to do this particular formatting. Again, you can do that as well inside of the formatting capabilities built within Ephesoft, but you might use it within scripting. Look for anything that is of this type, and make sure that it's all uppercase or something to that effect. The other one that it's used for is some exports. And so if you're using something like a date time within CMIS, which is used for some ECM exports, which stands for Content Management Interoperability Services, then it would know to do the transformation to do a date time for that particular value, as well as if you're doing a database export, would know that that would be a particular field. But within Ephesoft itself, everything is kept within XML. That XML is kept within strings, within values. So there's not really a data type specific functionality in the processing of Ephesoft, minus what I was describing as the scripting capabilities. So you can look for anything that's a field of this type, as opposed to having rules of every single for every single field. So let's go ahead and go back to here and look at the next couple. We have a pattern, an OCR confidence, and a field type. So a pattern is used for general regular expression extraction. I seldom use this, and what it does is it compares all the values inside of a particular document and looks for a pattern. It could be powerful if you're looking through, say, an email, and you're just looking for a policy number or a claim number, something with a particular pattern, perhaps a document or an email with a social security number. So there has to be a very explicit pattern to be used at that level. So I don't use it that often. The OCR confidence can be set at a per field level. And what that does is there's two confidences when extraction is made. One of them is just called confidence, and that confidence is based on the regular expression that you use for like a key value extraction. And so it could be 100 if you just had something like, you know, just dot splat and just like find anything. So if it found a single character, it would be 100. But it could be something that it has a partial match. And you're looking for 2 digits, but it found it in an 8-digit number. Then that would be a 25% confidence. So this one is the OCR confidence. The OCR confidence is given by the OCR tool. So if you're using the Windows platform, it's going to be using RicoStar and that confidence. If you're using the Linux platform, then it's going to use the nuance confidence. And that confidence can be very variant depending on what it finds. So it could be just the fidelity, which what you would expect. So if it's a 3rd generation scan fax, then that is not going to give you that great of an OCR result. But within the RicoStar world, and you could find that it gives you other type of lower of confidence, and it could be based on just simple things, and which makes sense. Like there is a different font type next to a different font type. It could be that the confidence is a little bit lower because there is a little askew in the line, and so it could have a very a very stylistic document, and so the value is overlapping 2 different lines to the left of it. But that's going to be a little bit lower because it's going to be like, well, I think it's this, but it didn't really coincide with just kind of like paragraph lines. So it's going to lower that confidence. And so that may have to be adjusted. So right now by default it's like 90, which might be really high. Then some of the forms that you might see might have something like that, like different stylistic, like there's the value that you're using is right next to a very bold value key or key value. So you may have to adjust that accordingly. So just know that you might have to manipulate that. That way you get straight through processing when you're doing extraction. Okay, the field type that is used is mostly just within widgets inside of the validation screen. And so you might have something that's text, and that's just going to give you a text box. If you have list, then it's going to give you a drop list. A checkbox is going to be a checkbox. A really big surprise there. A date will give you a control for a date selector. Multi-line will just kind of give you a bigger area for being able to see something like if you had an address or something that is more complex or just a longer value. And then a combo will have kind of like the combination of that text field as well as the list. So that will give you the capability of being able to control that validation a little bit more refined. So let's go ahead and go back and look at the next few. I'm also going to open up, hold on a sec. Let's take a look at, that's really strange. My cursor is not showing up. Let me just try to, okay, let's try to fly blind. Hello, okay. All right, so this is going to be in the batch instance management. So I just want to look at what that validation looks like for a second. And holy wow, this is fun. Forgive me for a second. I'm going to switch back real quick and see if I get it back. All right, cursors are good. So I'm going to open up this particular batch. And this is the validation screen, if you're not familiar with Ephesoft that I was talking about. So these controls that you might see here might have that drop down. It might actually have a date control. That is what's going to be controlling this particular view. So going back to this, we're going back to the presentation. Let's look at the category and then the field order and sample value. So going back to here, the category is just the tab that it is that it's listed under inside of the validation. So you might have different groupings of data for a particular document type. And so what I mean by that, and actually we'll show you that validation screen again before we'll go on. You can see that this has index data. You might have multiple tabs. So it might be customer and borrower information, or policy information and customer information. So if you want to disperse it, the only time I ever use that is if you're extracting a lot, because what you want to be as efficient as possible. And even if Ephesoft is really user-friendly in the sense of taking you to the next thing you need to look at, you can see right here, this one was a little bit lower OCR confidence than we have set. It would take you to a different tab if that's the next thing you need to review. I still find it that if it can have a single view with just everything in it, which you can see can hold quite a bit within a single view, then it's better for those clients or those operators that are dealing with the validation. So that's what that's used for. One of the things I don't like is there's like a default that doesn't, it's just like index data, or actually not index data, because that's what I just had on there. It's like data fields or something to that effect. I don't really like what they have on default there, so you might want to make it specific just to make the UI a little bit more user-friendly. The filled order is just important because that is, if you have multiple fields, and let's go back to that view. This is important because this is going to run in this order. And one of the rules that we went over in past episodes is you can make a rule that's based off another extraction. So I can find something that says, find this table and find this label, and then I can use that label as the key for another rule. That one would have to, of course, fire before you can use that other value to be an extraction rule. And so that's pretty much the field order. It will have some formatting. So you might want certain data grouped by each other inside of that validation UI, but that's all it's there for. And the sample value is only for user. We saw a second ago in that validation screen that there's this little message box when there's an issue. So you could use something that says, a sample value is this sort of date or this sort of date value. That's what that sample is. So let's go back here and let's look at the next few. All right, let's look at field option value list and the barcode. The field option value list, that's only used for the list in combo. And it's just if you want a drop down that has a specific list or specific values that can be selected from, then you would use a list if it's explicit. You would use a combo if you wanted to be able to do a type in or have that, a selection off the list. And this would just populate that list. One kind of pro tip is if you need to, you can dynamically populate that with scripting as well. So that's something that's in the batch XML, and you can use a script to auto-populate that. So the only time you would ever do that is if you had like kind of waterfalling lists, or you just needed some sort of capability of being able to control that based on some other value, like because it's this customer, these are the options of insurance that they have, something to that effect. The barcode is the type of barcode that it is, which you can see here is a huge list of different kinds of barcodes. So it supports a lot, and that's used in conjunction with kind of barcode extraction that you're using. So if you're doing barcode extraction with like the advanced barcode reader or something to that effect, then that will auto-populate when you're creating a rule for that extraction using that plugin to be able to say that's the type. So this is a QR code, and that would be able to be part of that. I know that this is crazy, but I started going through this and I was like, this is actually confusing. So we're just going to keep on going through. The ML field mapping, it's only used for batch classes designated as an invoice category. Going back to, I think it was 2019.1, or it might have been 4 or 5, they started introducing these algorithms for being able to do ML detection. They're kind of not used anymore. I don't know anybody that's actually using these in production, but if anybody is, love to hear you. Just post on that question. But most things have moved over to Semantik, and they're talking about taking some of those algorithms and moving them back inside of Ephesoft Transact. So I think that this is going to be deprecated at some time. But if you specify the batch class as being an invoice category, then you can start using this ML field mapping for saying, you know, that's a particular field. So that's an amount, that's a date, that's an invoice number, that's a PO number. So you can start specifying that, and then it has a little bit more rules around how it extracts that information. I'm not going to go into that much just because I don't know anybody using it, and we don't really use it. Validation operator, so you can create validation rules for a particular field, and this just specifies whether it's and or. So if you create more than one rule, is it any of these or all of these that it has to comply to be a valid value? Additional configuration, here's where it starts getting fun, start getting checkboxes inside of a dropdown. So force validation, that is exactly what it says. And so even if it's very confident of that value, you want somebody to take a look at it every single time. Field value change script means that if somebody changes that value and when they tab out of that field, that you want to run some sort of scripting logic. Hidden, exactly what it is. You don't want to see it, and you can see that there is one field that I have as hidden inside of here, and it did not show up on the validation screen. Read only, you can't change it. So it might be auto-populated from a backend system or a database, but you want to make it reference to the operator, then they can't change it inside there. Apply to all, I've never used this, to be very specific. And I still don't really understand exactly how it's used. I need to play with it a little bit, but essentially what the documentation says, from what documentation I can find on this functionality, is if it does not have a value and there's a like document type inside of the batch instance with a like document, if you change that value, then you want it to persist to this document as well. So let's say that you're dealing with a loan and you had a loan number for multiple documents within a batch instance. If nothing was able to be extracted, what you can actually do is, in theory, select this, and then if this was changed, then anything else that was blank that said, you know, loan number would get auto-populated with that you filled in for one of the documents and not necessarily all the documents. So I still need to play with that more, but that's what the document says. I've never used that before. And force validation with alternative values, very similar to force validation, but you have the capability of whether or not you want to find alternate values. So you create these rules for extraction. And if more than one rule triggers at different various confidences, then this would then force validation if it had more than one result from those rules that you created. All right. So the last couple that we have on here is the default value batch class field. Again, something that I've never used before, but it could be interesting. So is there something at the batch class level that you want to persist to a value? In this case, I said the import date. Then you can specify what that value is without doing scripting, and then it would persist inside of here. So you can see that this was imported yesterday at 12:30 on my server. So that's one of the ways you can do it. The other thing that you can do is set a default value. In this case, you can see that a foo bar, and I filled out both of these, and the reason that I wanted to show you that is because the default batch class value will trump that which is the default value. So just know that if you have these both populated, that only the default value from the batch class field will populate. If you don't have this, then foobar would be the value of that. So nice and handy if you want to actually just stick a value inside of there for export capabilities, or just default it for some other reason. If you didn't find a value, then set it as, you know, not found, but you wanted some value inside of there. All right, that was a whole lot of words for one table of thing. So those are the index fields and the properties that you can set for a particular index fields. Are there any questions? All right, thank God, because I'm tired of talking about that. So let's move on. So the system configuration, was somebody asked to kind of go over this, and so I thought I would, because there's a whole lot of miscellaneous information inside of here. One of them, which I'm still quite not sure how to use, nor have I ever used. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let me open up a different browser, because I needed to be super admin to have access to these. Sorry. So this is the system configuration. If you're not familiar with the user interface, you can kind of get to the different functionalities of Ephesoft Transact with this little slide out menu. So right now we're looking at the system configuration. And you can see here, this was kind of the system level configuration that didn't really go anywhere else. One of the things you can do within Ephesoft when you're creating key value extraction rules is that you can have a pool of regexes. So you don't have to go type it out every single time. There's a slew of them that are already generated inside of Ephesoft. As you can see, they're kind of subcategorized, and I lost my mouse again, so I'm going to switch back and forth. So you can see that there's someone an address, amounts, and so there's different regular expressions that you might have in there, and then you can have a description of that regular expression. This gives you the capability of administrating it. So if you had something like a policy ID, a client number, something that you wanted to give your developers fast access to, so they're not typing it or cutting and pasting it for something else, and you want to control those, this gives you the capability of being able to add new ones. And you also have the capability of being able to export these. So you can export and add them into a different server. So a mechanism of doing configuration management if you wanted to move them from one server to another for some reason. So that's that piece. The generate key, this is used if you want to do encryption of the batch XMLs. And so as I mentioned before, while batches are going through Ephesoft Transact, all of the information kind of aggregates in these XML files. So it has all the classification, extraction information. If you had PII and for some reason wanted to, personally identifiable information, and you wanted to encrypt that, then this is where you would generate that key for that encryption. Note that there is a pretty good performance impact for this, encrypting things, decrypting things that for processing purposes, but we have a couple clients using that, and it works pretty well. There's a regex builder that's only for use inside of here and just gives you kind of a UI of being able to generate those regular expressions that could be then persisted to the regex pool. All right, so workflow management. Ephesoft works as a workflow, and so it's a very linear workflow. They have the nomenclature of having modules and plugins. Modules are just logical representations of groups of plugins. And so they're not really used for anything other than you can restart things at a module, so a group of plugins. The plugins are really truly the steps of the workflow. This gives you the capability of controlling the requirements or the precursors that need to be part of other plugins as you add them. It also gives you the capability, if you create a custom plugin, which we're not going to go into now, but if you wanted to create your own for export capabilities or integration capabilities, then you would be able to import your batch class here to a particular instance of Ephesoft. Ephesoft Cloud is specifically for Ephesoft Cloud Hyperextender. The Cloud Hyperextender lets you utilize the cloud like AWS Cloud for the majority of the big work. And so the CPU work and everything else that's going on around transformations, OCR capabilities, this gives you the capability of being able to lift that out and saying, I want that to process here, and then we'll deal with all of those operator steps on the server itself. So it does go up and down from the server, but whereas if you had a 4-core server, which would only process somewhere between 15 and 20 pages per minute, you might be able to, on the hyperextender, do like 5,000 pages a minute. So it could be used in conjunction with the smaller system, but of course, that has a per page count cost as well. So it really depends on your implementation to figure out if it's going to get you the ROI that you need. But definitely can have less hardware and do a heck of a lot more within the Ephesoft Transact world using the hyperextender. Connection Manager lets you connect database connections. So this will, the passwords that are used and the database connection strings and URLs for a couple of features. One of them is fuzzy database, which is something that I haven't really went over. I might do that in a future episode, as well as if you're exporting to a database. So this gives you the capability of having a singular location that will allow you to edit those particular connections and add new connections. One thing that is to note, and that's why I paused for a second, that I should probably add, is that when you're doing configuration management of batch classes, and so you're moving one batch class from one server to another, it does give you the capability to say, hey, do you want to import this connection string that's used for this? And then you can choose whether or not. So there's a couple different ways on whether or not you're going to add that connection string, which is this connection name that's used. Or it could be that you're just going to import it when you bring it in the next time. But just to note that you have both of those options. License detail, I kind of want to go over that a little bit, just because a lot of people don't know that it's here, and it's important to know, what this particular one. I have a license version of for 4 or 5, and so it so happens that 4 or 5 licenses still work with 2020.1, so that's my running application, which is the latest version of Ephesoft Transact. Also talks about expiration, whether or not you have certain capabilities of, whether it's unlimited page count, what kind of reporting, if it's just basic or advanced, whether or not you have web services turned on. So there's a huge amount of information that's in here that may give you information because, for instance, your expiration date doesn't really come to the login screen until 30 days. And you might want to know, okay, when do we have to renew your license? And so this would give you the capability of being able to do that. But a lot of the features that we've been talking about, whether or not you have cluster capabilities, high performance, that hyper extender that I was talking about, the number of cores that you're allotted, are all inside of here. Access Manager lets you control what groups, and so this might be your Active Directory groups, and so what groups do you have and what access do they have and in what screen, So again, these are different features and functionalities inside of Ephesoft Transact, whether it be operator or administration. This gives you the capability of controlling who has access to what. Currency configuration, to be honest, is one of those things that I've never used, but you can specify in here the different kind of currencies that you want to support. And then right now, I think the only implementation, and love to hear if somebody's using it in another way, is that there are some certain transformations in formatting. So there's a formatter that you can add to your particular batch class, and that's the only time that I've ever seen this used or know that it is used. So again, something that I don't use that much. And this is still something that I'm looking to see exactly what functionality it is, because if you can see here, it's a JWT token identifier, which is usually used inside of SAML authentication. And I'm not really sure if this is just used for like some of the functionality of support around Okta, or some of the functionality that you have like connectivity with like Box, if you're exporting to Box. I haven't seen anybody use that, to be honest. So if I figure that out, I actually have a couple questions out that I asked yesterday. If I figure that out, definitely I will add that to a future episode of Professor Pat. Any questions on configuration management? All right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is folder management, which is pretty simple. So there are certain files that you could use for the configuration of a particular batch class or Ephesoft that are on the server. And so not necessarily something that you would just have the capability of being able to manipulate through the user interface. So here I have, and I wanted to show you kind of like the difference between one of those groups. So giving a group that has access to a particular batch class, folder access, and a super admin. So you can see here, this one I'm a super admin, so I have access to all shared folders. So I can look at any batch class. I can look at the Ephesoft system folder, which has all batch instance running. So that gives them a lot of functionality. But of course, that is only something that is given to super users. You can't even give that as a selection in that access manager to any other group. So just so you know. So let's go ahead and take a look at, hold on one sec, what it looks like from just a group, which I have here. And so if I look under folder management here, which this is a different group that just has certain access to a batch class in this particular instance, you can see that I only have this BC folder. And so just kind of going under what you might use that for. I'm not going to go for every folder because it's just not typically used. If you're using CMIS, there's a properties file that has mapping. And so this is the document type and field inside of Ephesoft. This is the document type and property inside of my ECM functionality. Same kind of thing goes with the mapping for a database. The samples you might manipulate, samples used for classification. Sometimes you want to not have a last explicit page. The way that Ephesoft Transact works is that if it finds a finality, an end page, then it will just kind of truncate that document. Sometimes there's ancillary information that can be done, and so sometimes we'll go in and just manipulate it. So that last page, we just move to a middle page, and so it's just another optional middle page. By default, when you drag and drop a sample inside of Ephesoft for classification training, it will put first page on first page, middle page on middle page, last page inside of last page. And so this will give you the capability of being able to manipulate that. So it's not really used that often, and to be honest, like a lot of times the people that are configuring Ephesoft have access to the server, and so they can just do it on there. So one of the just wanted to kind of go over what folder management does and what you can actually do inside of there. And I think that that's what I had, but are there any questions on those pieces? No. So the last thing that I wanted to go over, which is just really quick, is I can't believe that this is actually week 8. I know that some of you are brand new to attending these, and I know that some of you have attended all or a lot of these, but we've just went through a lot of information over the past 7 weeks. And so go ahead and go there if you want to look at some of these things. So we've analyzed duplicate documents, what you want to do for there. What is document assembly and how do you customize it? We did an integration with Vidato for handwriting. We have a demo of that. A deep dive on classification and assembly of documents, a deep dive of extraction, something that we open source for batch instance viewers, so you can look at everything that's a batch instance and in reporting and inside of reporting archive, and something that we open sourced. So a demo of that, confidence scoring, external application integration, as I mentioned before, the Semantik demo, what export options do I have out of the box, what reporting options do I have, quick screen for identification extraction that works in Ephesoft, optimizing the Ephesoft server, administration, configuration management. So we went through a lot of topics. So if there's something that piques your interest or something that you just kind of want to dabble in some of these, I'd love some feedback on not only the format but the content. So please feel free to watch those. You can find those on the Zia Consulting website. And one of the other things that we're going to start asking you about, and people that signed up for this, and we're going to start asking just in general, is what would you like to see in these? What is the appropriate cadence for these? Should we have more of these? But everything that we have on here is ziaconsulting.com, Professor Pat. And so please feel free to watch those and give her feedback. On that note, I think that we are done for the day, Emily. Thank you for attending.